Kubernetes for Humans.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Kubernetes for Humans podcast. Today, with me in the show, we have Josh. Josh, happy to meet you.
Nice to meet you as well. Glad to be here.
I'm happy that you are here as well. Maybe you can tell us a bit about yourself. Like, what do you do?
Yeah, I don't know if we have enough time in this whole podcast, but I'll try to keep it short. So I'm Josh Schlanger. I'm based here in the U.S. Out of the Bay Area, and I joke, I've been in industry a long time. I used to have hair. If you're watching this, I used to have hair when I started. Don't so much anymore. But the last, I would say, 15 years or so of my career have been primarily focused in infrastructure, DevOps, leading DevOps teams, platform engineering teams, SRE, owning FinOps, and all the things associated with costs in that space. Worked in different verticals, right? Worked for Martech companies, worked for e-commerce companies, worked for health tech companies. So had a pretty large span of companies, different types of companies I work for, all, trying to solve their business problems with the similar technologies. So I've been able to bring my knowledge and experience to those companies. And then, recently I left the company I was working at. I decided to want to go out on my own. So I'm hyper focused on FinOps and particularly doing two things, consulting and advising with companies to help them get their costs under control, as well as part of that process, as I learned that, I don't know, from a FinOps perspective, there's lots and lots of tools and service companies in the space. So I started building a database, a directory, I call it, of FinOps companies. I'm tracking close to over 200 so far that I'm talking to. So anyway, that's a little bit about me and what I do and some of my experience.
No, it's like a great intro. So maybe you have all of this background, different sector, which is cool because we meet a lot of the time people who are in the same sector. Maybe let's start with that. Just if you can talk a bit about the difference that you had as someone who is in charge of DevOps and SRE in different sectors. I think it can be quite interesting to our listeners.
Yeah, sure. It's interesting. For me, the technology was always the same in those different companies. Right now, the technology changed, right? It's dynamic. They're adding new capabilities. I mean, I remember the day when Kubernetes was first released, from Google, and then people started using it. And I was at a Martech company, and we considered using it, but it was way too complicated. There weren't a lot of tools. You had to be
Martech is like marketing tech, just so I
yeah,
see.
yes, sorry, yes. So marketing technology
Yeah,
companies,
sorry.
right? No, yeah. So for the audience, the
Yeah.
marketing technology companies, SaaS-based solution,
Mhm.
uh, and you know, in that company, we looked at Kubernetes in the very early days. We said, no, we're a small team, too complicated. Let's look at something else. So we definitely went container route. We used a tool called Rancher. That was great for us at the time. But the point being is, it wasn't about the technologies in those different companies, because you can go from different verticals to different verticals. It was about what's the business problem you're trying to solve, and then will the technology fit or solve that business problem.
Mhm.
And in a lot of cases, from a scale perspective, from a growth perspective, those technologies we adopted were useful.
Mhm.
But you do have to be cognizant of not getting caught up. And earlier in my career, I got caught up in this problem is like, you love technology, like, oh, here's a new
Yeah.
bell with shiny object, right?
Mhm.
And you have to be very careful. It's like, okay, let's really solve the problem. If we can use the new shiny bell, that's great. If not, let's use something tried and true.
Mhm. Okay, so that was like the Martech. What about like e-commerce and like other areas? Like like we don't need to go over all of them, but which like area is the best for like DevOps people or like operation people, if any?
I think they're all great. I don't think it really I mean, it's a bit of you could call it a bit of like, ride the middle here, but really any of them have technical problems they need to solve, and they need DevOps platform engineers, SREs to go solve them. You know, I think it becomes a little bit of a personal preference. What are you interested in as part of that solving that business problem where you can apply the tech? Are you interested in e-commerce? Do you think it's interesting? Now, I work for the company did online consignment, so people would consign their items. I actually found that whole workflow super interesting, where people would send their stuff into a warehouse. So I went to the warehouse, I saw the whole process and how we use technology to get everything in, to then post it to the site through the sales process and then shipping out, right? And there was all kinds of unique things that we were doing for that. But again, at the same time, the technologies behind the scenes, the infrastructure we were using was the same as what I'd used previously. But I found that one particularly interesting. The health tech one, again, another super interesting, challenge. How do you connect patients to the right providers? In this case, it was mental health focused, right? And solving that problem, we had different challenges, but we were using, again, the same technology. So I think it becomes, it's a bit of a cop out. I think it becomes a personal decision on the types of companies you go work for, but the technology at the core is still the same. And you still need to apply it in the way that makes sense for that business.
Okay, it's like a bit like politician answer, but I let it slide that you like all
Okay.
things with the same.
I'll
Maybe
have more opinions on going forward. How about that?
yeah, no, like that's your like your core. So maybe let me ask you a different question. Like, what industry spend the most money without like any real need? Because now what you do is like cost optimization, right? So are there different areas? Maybe like share a bit about your journey to like this FinOps space even before that, and then I'll ask a couple of follow-up questions on that topic.
Yeah, sure. So, I joked in the beginning, I started industry with hair, and I started industry before cloud existed, right? So it was all data centers, closets in offices where you had servers, you'd have to buy software. So it's driven by capital expense or CAPEX budgets.
Mhm.
And a lot of times you'd have to go out to the CFO, or the CTO and CFO and say, "Hey, look, we need to go make this investment. We're doing all this. We're growing. You've got some product roadmap. Here's what we need to go buy."
Mhm.
Okay, and then we figure out how best to use that. And I enjoyed that aspect of the business. And then when things moved to cloud, it wasn't CapEx because you put your credit card down, right? And it became all operating expense or OPEX.
Mhm.
And now, though, it was a little bit more wild, wild west because people would spin stuff up, they would forget about it, they would, so it caused all kinds of challenges. And wrapping your hands around that and getting control of that was really super, super critical and important, particularly for SaaS companies, because a lot of that expense impacted your margin. So
Mhm. No.
I may talk a little, yeah. So for those who may not know, who are listening, right? We're talking about really the gross margin, right? So your top line revenue less your cost of goods sold or cost of sales, whatever that number is, it becomes your margin number. So making sure you're in a SaaS business, you had to hit a certain percentage, typically in 70-80% range. Well, if you're running resources in production that you don't really need, you could potentially impact those numbers. And I've seen it happen. I've seen it go down to, 15-60%, which was a real problem. So how do you bring that back up? So again, I always enjoyed that because it was a problem. I love puzzles, right? So how do we solve this problem? How do we deliver what we need to deliver for the customers, making sure performance and reliability was there while also managing the costs? And so for the companies, that I worked in these spaces that I talked about previously, e-commerce, Martech, it was always like, okay, we're going to go build this, but let's do this in a smart and intelligent way, and then use the tools in the market to either give us visibility or help us use different components. So I'm a big, I've used mostly AWS in my experience. So we were early adopters of like the spot market and RIs and how do you manage those costs as well as, making sure we got rid of resources or that were waste around it. So that's a little bit, and I've done that, I've done FinOps or this more of the cloud version of it for the last decade, maybe even before it was really called FinOps. And now, now it's expanding beyond just the hyperscalers, right? So, bills for your observability tools, think Datadog, Dynatrace, New
Mhm.
Relic. Your data solutions, Snowflake, Databricks, Mongo, right? Besides the hyperscaler, are growing at maybe even a greater rate than what their cloud spend is. So now organizations are having to deal with all that, and then with AI and what that's going to do to your data. So there's a lot of opportunity in this space to help continue to manage that. And I was just talking to somebody else earlier today, and it reminds me of going back to the days of CapEx. You have to be more thoughtful in how you're going to spend your money earlier in the process, much like
Mhm.
when you're buying hardware and software. So I feel like we're maybe trending a little bit back in that direction.
What do you think the AI is doing to that space? Like, is like CapEx is not important anymore? It just increased over time? Like, what's your take on like how is the world changing because of that?
Yeah, so it's a pretty broad question. Let me see if I can sort of narrow it down a little bit. I think, AI is going to impact for organizations how they think about their data, right? How they keep their data maybe near line versus offline, right? Because they want to use that data for context related stuff.
Mm.
So there's going to be more
Right.
from that perspective.
No.
I also think that, as people use these products and, everybody's talking about tokens or token usage, right? So that's sort of the metric you determine on how much you're using. But people are forgetting also, like, and I don't know if you all are using, but using Claude
Mhm.
Code
Yeah, with our yeah.
or right? So
Mm.
that, you pay for that, right? Or
Yep.
you
I do.
maybe
I pay a
right.
lot of money for that. Yeah.
Well, exactly, and then so not only do you have token usage, you've got you got this tool that you're using, Claude Code,
Mhm.
and then you also have, maybe others in your organization have a chat license, so they're talking to Claude to help them
Mm.
write materials or help you with some analysis. So if you think about all of those different things, these providers are going to be a significant, I think over time, a significantly larger part of spend as we move forward. So so as organizations, continue to use cloud and continue to use all these tools, I can definitely see these AI tools catching up pretty quick as people adopt them.
Maybe let me ask you, like, you talk again, like, on the I understand what you're saying from the high level perspective, but in the end, cost is a lot of the time debate, I will say, or at least some tension between the FinOps guys or like the financial people to the developers to the DevOps, right? Like, they are like the easy things, like use a cheaper machine because you're underutilizing that. No one will oppose to that, right? Like, most of the
Sure.
time. But a lot of the times, the real cost saving is done because we re-architecture our application, right? Or we change something in the flow that we're working, or not really. So maybe like, what's your take on like whose problem is it? This like FinOps thingy? Is it the VP R&D? Is it the operation people? Is it no one?
Yeah. So okay. So the I think the execution or the operational component falls into typical SaaS business will fall in under R&D for sure.
Mm.
They own fixing the problem. I do think that they need visibility or awareness of what the guardrails are. So that's an executive, or, CFO, CEO sort of saying, "Hey, look, here's the numbers that we need to hit. Here's what here's your forecast. You need to architect and design within these frameworks, right? Based on what we want to go build. We want to have X number of customers. We want to build these products. You should have some, I don't know if you do like architectural decision records or any sort of pre-work as a way to determine what you're gonna go build, whether it's a product, whether it's a new product or, adding to an existing product. But you need to work within those frameworks, within those guardrails. But the execution, the delivery of it needs to be the ones who can do the work, and that's I think the engineers.
Mhm.
So, but they can't do it in a vacuum. They need some information, right? Say, or guardrails, I'll call them policies, whatever, something like that, that says, here's what you need to go do. But that my opinion is, for sure, engineers need to own that.
Okay, we are like closing to the end of the time. Maybe you can talk a bit about the biggest like gotchas, or like let's say I'm a CTO, right? And I'm indeed a CTO. What are the like biggest cost spenders that I don't even know? Or like, let's say someone told me I have to reduce my cost. Like, how would I like start such a project?
Yeah, so it's a good question. What I would tell you is that you need to have some level of visibility on, like, okay, here's where we're spending, but then here are the areas for opportunities potentially to reduce, right? And you need to look at those areas. So some big areas, if you're looking at just purely the hyperscalers, right? I would look to see how you're managing your, and if you're, this is Commodore, right? So your Kubernetes, so I would look at your Kubernetes clusters, and are you appropriately sized for the workloads? And is that an opportunity? Now, if you have one cluster, maybe not, but if you have lots of clusters, there may be opportunities. But I think the biggest areas for organizations, really, at the end of the day, is probably going to be in the data space in some way, whether it's databases, whether it's how you're managing your storage, your S3 storage, and if you're tiering that storage and moving it off to other tiers. Um, if you think about, I'm lumping in the Mongos, Databricks, Snowflakes of the world, right? So if you've got that, you need to think about how you're managing that. So those are the areas that I would focus. So thinking about data and anything associated with data would be big ones that I would focus on. If I was coming to you as a CTO and saying, "Hey, we need to reduce it," take a look here first.
Mhm. Okay, okay, that does make sense. That does make sense. Um, Maybe let's talk a bit about like where are we going, maybe as an industry. Like, what are the biggest trends that you're seeing right now, in our space?
And when you say in our space, or
Like,
FinOps, or just more holistically?
but give me both. Why not? Like you said, there are like 200 tools in the FinOps space, so I think like this space is moving fast. So both.
Yeah. So I think, specifically for FinOps, I see there's a couple of trends. I think not most, there's this, let me say it this way. There's a trend towards moving, and I talked about a lot about it today, moving to get in front of things like, what is a governance? What's your top-down view? How do you get in front of these costs? Because if you're already spending too much, you're sort of behind the eight ball. So now companies are trying to figure out, what does that look like? When I say companies, these solutions are trying to figure out what that looks like. That's one. Secondly, and I would say more generally, is I'm excited to see how, and I'm starting to see a little bit of how AI is being embedded into products. So you don't necessarily interact directly with the AI, but AI is not just from a Claude code and building the product, but there's a lot of, I'll call it, agents behind the scenes doing different aspects of the work that you don't really realize, but it surfaces in some way in your application. So there's this, using really AI as a tool, which to help build these companies out. So I think that's a general trend that I'm seeing both in the FitOps, and I say in more holistically across the board. Uh, the other interesting thing is, I'll mention it really around platform teams,
Mhm.
right? So I'll take it one step back real quick. So I don't, so I see, we use the term DevOps pretty loosely. I think DevOps is much more of a culture than a function, right? And that may be controversial, but I think, it's DevOps is about, how do you empower engineers to own the full operational as well as development components.
Mhm.
So who's going to help them do that? That's where I think platform engineering comes into play. They really are the glue that brings everything together. And I think there is this sort of trend to slap what we would in history called system admins as platform engineers or DevOps engineers, and I think that's a mistake. I think there needs to be a proper mindset of what platform engineering is. They're an enabling and glue team, right? And when I say enabling, they enable developers to move as quickly and as fast as possible while ensuring that they can operate these systems. So I don't know if that's a trend, but more my opinion and take. And I do
Mhm.
think that we need to continue to see more platform teams really coming about to help development teams succeed.
Okay, that's quite cool. What? is like your prediction of like where are we going maybe as like an industry, or like if we're going to talk in 2 years, what do you think is going to be like completely different?
I mean, I don't think this is going to be news to anybody, but how we use AI to do these functions is going to be super interesting, right? So you're starting to see with these more on the SRE side, AI, for SRE or these automated systems doing, more SRE type work. There's a handful of companies out there in the space. So I would say, and I would actually ask you, I'd be curious, your opinion too here, but I know but I think AI is going to be the big one, and how we adopt that into the different practices and capabilities.
Yeah, like I think that like AI is the double-edged sword that everyone is both fearing and like using, right? Like it costs us much more money, but it can maybe save us more money. So I think like that's like the biggest like trend that I think, and I think that like AI SRE, you talked about it also a bit like observability and cost. I think they are also like kind of like starting to merge, as we helping with to the cost and optimization. Commodore even were like an AI SRE, because I think those words are kind of interconnected. Okay,
Yep.
maybe to conclude, like one tip from you to our listeners, like long time listeners. What do you think?
Yeah. So, one tip. So if you're struggling or thinking about cost, do the easiest thing possible. Go within your cloud providers. They all provide some, trusted advisor like, hey, go do this, go do that. Go do that and clean up whatever waste and unused resources. If you are new to FinOps or even DevOps, my feedback is go do things. You can't train and read your way into DevOps. You need to go do and you need to experience, right? I think, from my experience, all the callous, hands that I have, all the rough skin I've got is from, both good and bad experiences,
Well,
right? And we've all been there, but I wouldn't have been as good a leader and as good an engineer if I didn't experience the ups and downs. So, if you're considering getting into the space,
mhm,
find a job, do whatever you can, take it and learn, right?
mhm,
I believe learning, doing the work and on the job is much better than trying to read your way or,
mhm.
certify your way into the role.
Okay, that's a good tip. Okay, with that, I think we'll conclude the meeting. It was a pleasure having you. And yeah, let's hope we will save some money.
All right. Really appreciate it. Thanks for inviting me today.
Kubernetes for humans.